because it'll all build on each other. Okay? So, Ryan, step down.
Oh, Mark is up.
Are you the scribe? All right. So it's Mark, right? We'll start with Mark. And so we've got 1 Peter 1, 1 Peter 2 there.
Okay, so we have first
Can you
Peter.
stand up just to make sure everybody hears you?
Okay, so we had 1 Peter 1, and it starts off, introduces itself. It's a letter to disciples that have been spread all over the place. So as you go through 1 Peter 1, you get the impression it's really a reminder, a call back to the things that through Jesus was delivered to the disciples. And it talks about hope. It talks about reminding them of the preciousness of Jesus, about living holy. And so he kind of sets the stage on, I want to make sure you understand who you are and who provided this to you. And talk about a gift that goes beyond anything that's precious in the world. It's far beyond that. So
Awesome. So it's a reminder of things they already know, but he's painting this incredible picture about the salvation that they've received and how precious it is, and he's prepping them. You know, this is one of the common things they do in letters, is they start out with who it is. This is Peter writing to this group. So there's in your handout that I eventually handed out to you, you will see the common form for the epistle is author, recipient, a greeting, some kind of prayer and thanksgiving, then he gets into the body. So you got all of that in yours, and he's prepping them to give them some instructions. Okay, great. How about chapter 2?
Chapter 2. So, and all in view of what Mark said, chapter 2 starts off with, therefore, do these things. But we thought that the main point of the entire chapter was that you were chosen and set apart to follow the example of Jesus, the chief cornerstone, and to live like him in these challenging times. And some subpoints we had were that, verses 4 through 8, it really talks about Jesus being the chief cornerstone, and, some people will believe, and that strength to them, and some people reject. And, then in verses 9 and 10, it really talks about, being chosen, being spiritual house and building. And then 11 through 25 talks a lot about, the governors and the authorities, submitting to them and submitting as slaves, and those kinds of things. And really how to live overall through the times that are going on.
Yeah. And now picture all the things happening around them. There's some kind of suffering going on, right? There's some kind of persecution, and it's at the point where some people are quitting. And Peter's trying to get them to look at Jesus and deal with their sin and keep going on. So there were cultural pressures, and there were persecution. There were different things that they're fighting. And so he's setting that up. And I love it says to look at Jesus and walk in his steps. In his steps is from chapter 2. All right, chapter 3.
All right. So chapter 3 is basically about how to live a godly life. So the first part is mainly practicals on how to do that. So first for wives, and then for husbands, and then everyone. And also at the end, it's talking about you're going to go through suffering, but that's okay, and deal with that instead of trying to turn your back on God.
Yeah, and very practical, right? He talks about wives, he talks about husbands and what they're supposed to do, and how you react in situations. So chapter 3 gets very practical. And that's kind of typical, where you start with a greeting, you get the general picture or the principle, and then you start applying it to situations that maybe are practical for that church. All right, 4?
So in chapter 4, it kind of goes back to the same theme in chapter 2. We said that the main point in chapter 4 is to suffer in style. Given the sufferings that the audience is going through, and so they can relate to what he's talking about, we need to meditate on the fact that Jesus also suffered and suffered faithfully. We shouldn't be surprised that we're going through these things, because Jesus did, and it's right for his people to suffer also. Having the end times in mind also sharpens our focus. Feeling like you're living on the edge of the end of the world makes you focus. And then the practical in chapter 4, the biggest practical was to use our spiritual gifts to build up the body, to love other Christians. And in doing that, we take our suffering day by day. It gives us something to focus on rather than our sufferings. Focus on Jesus, focusing on loving your neighbor.
Very well said. Very well said. I love that last practical where a lot of times what happens is when there's anxiety about what's going on around you, you freeze and you stop living out your Christian life. So you're no longer deeply loving one another deeply from the heart and using your gifts to serve the body. And he's trying to spur them to continue to do that. And then the picture of the end times is just, it's filled throughout 1st and 2nd Peter, where he wants us to think about heaven. He wants us to think how awesome it is, which means this is not that good. And sometimes even in America, because we're so spoiled with everything we have, we think this is so good. Sometimes we think, oh, this is terrible. But anyway. All right, chapter 5.
So that's us.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the very first part of chapter 5, we saw a lot of comparison of how we should interact with each other, how we should be shepherding our church and our fellow Christians, and then how the younger should act, like both parties are acting in humility that we get from Christ. And then we have like this awesome conclusion of encouragement of how to humble ourselves just because of God, and how he's like that big example. And then I love the end about how we stand firm against Satan together as a body, all because of Jesus and humility and standing firm and just shepherding each other against Satan and his attacks. And then he gives examples from all the other brothers to encourage these people.
Amen.
Faith.
Amen.
Kind of a cool point in chapter 5. He mentions Silas or Silvanus, depending what translation you have. And 1 Peter was written, Paul gave the words, but Silas wrote it down. And it turns out 1 Peter, the language is actually more ornate and more like formal and more established. It's really good Greek. In 2 Peter, he didn't have Silas helping him out. It's really choppy. It's short sentences. The vocabulary is reduced. Some people argue it's two different authors. But one explanation is because Silas was actually Greek, and his Greek was refined, and he was educated. He had a better way with his words, and he polished. Like he took what Paul said, and he polished it a little bit. So kind of interesting. But great summary. All right, now we're in 2 Peter, which is a couple years later. And picture this. Peter's about to die. So he knows Paul just got killed, is what most people think. Paul just got killed. He got beheaded. And he's on death row, waiting to die. And he's like, I got to write one more letter. And so that's what he's about to pen. So what do you get in chapter 1?
You just took it. No. I think that, so he's reminding them basically that he's leaving. He's about to die. And he says, I'm reminding you of what you already know. Strengthen it. Strengthen what you already know. And that I'm leaving this for you so that even though I'm going to be gone, I'm going to heaven, I want you guys to be there too. And then something that kind of strikes me interestingly, and as I've been trying to apply to myself, is as the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. I mean, how many things that aren't clear to me now, but weren't clear to me earlier in my life, are clear to me now? And I'm talking about me, I should be thinking about them. But what things weren't clear are becoming clear as the morning star rises in our heart, which is the word. And I mean, it's something I've been trying to deal with is my perceptions when I was younger as a Christian, my perceptions now as a morning star. By the way, that's a little scientific note here. Morning star, the sun is a star. They didn't know that then, how many things are scary in the dark when the light's on them? They're not as scary. And so that's what. And now you can see where the real danger is once the light's on there.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, and so he's prepping them. And one of my favorite Second Peter 1 scriptures is where he talks about, I'm an eyewitness to this. You can trust my words. There was obviously fighting doubt. Picture this. They didn't have the New Testament. So they were listening to people. An eyewitness account had a lot of value. And somebody said, I know all about Jesus. And they just start speaking. And they could be a false prophet. So they could start teaching all kinds of things with their interpretation of Jesus. And he's like, no. I was there on the mountain where God spoke to him and said, this is my son. You've got to listen to what I'm saying and not just to every prophet who comes along. And that kind of sets up chapter 2.
Yes, so it's one of the most intense chapters, I think. But it's a warning against false teachers, and I think you can see throughout like the churches or what's going on is that there are people like spreading different things that they've learned from like the world. So it's just this warning against the false teaching, but also knowing that God's going to protect those with the right teaching, to hold to the integrity of the gospel. And so even just that, to protect the church as well, like with the truth, and to keep that as in the forefront of their minds.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because even here in Charlottesville, you've got some cultural challenges, I'll call them, right? You've got the certain forms of Christianity which are accepted and certain which are scoffed at, right? Because there are a lot of religious people out that are not in Charlottesville, and there maybe Charlottesville is the home of UVA and the scholarly, and this is kind of what I picked up from talking to Drew about the city, is that there's a bit of a pride in the city, and there's a bit of, we're going to accept these other cultural norms like Buddhism or some other, we're going to think broader than these very simple Christians who just take the Bible. You know, and so we're fighting against that. And so when he had this conviction about false teaching, he just rips into them. And it's brutal. Anybody ever read the book of Jude? Like one of the shortest, it's the same thing, right? It's like almost this, the verse for verse, you could compare these two chapters and find like 80% similarity in what they're saying. And Jude was Jesus' brother, writing, just appealing to people to hold on to the gospel and not to cling to these false teachers that were spreading all kinds of things that they couldn't check against the New Testament because the New Testament didn't exist. When they received this letter, they were like, it's from Peter. Wow. And then chapter 3, I'll just summarize real quickly because it's one of my favorites and we won't have time to go into it. Chapter 3, picture this. When Peter was going to go and meet Jesus, Jesus was his best friend. If Peter was to see Jesus, he would run up to him and embrace him. Jesus, it's been so long. And he's pictured going to heaven to him was a reuniting of this incredible relationship that he had. And he paints the whole picture of Judgment Day, and when you get into the first coming and the second coming of Jesus, and then the separation of the righteous from the wicked, and they're going to be with me in the air and go to heaven, and then Hades and death and destruction are all going to be destroyed. Boy, I had a whole lesson on that. We won't have time for it today. You have to invite me back. All right. So what I'd like to do now is there's a video called The Bible Project. Have you ever gone to the site, thebibleproject.com? If you haven't, pull out your phone. I assume everybody has a smartphone. If you don't, I don't even know what to say. Surprise. Good for you. So if you go to thebibleproject.com.
To guide the Messianic community in Jerusalem through its earliest years.
We're not ready for you yet. So there's a poster. See if everybody got one. Because you're not going to be able to see it very well, I'm making sure you... There's plenty of them. So there's 1 Peter and 2 Peter. We're going to be doing 1 Peter. It's an 8-minute video that gives you the whole story of 1 Peter in 8 minutes. But I love the way they do it.